there's a way to eat and to consume food that is not actually nutritious to your body. And I think in the same way, we can go through life in such a way that we're living our life, but it's not actually being nutritious to our soul.
That's my next guest, Adam Vandoski. He's born and bred Midwesterner, a former amateur golfer, a dad, entrepreneur, and supply chain consultant turned sommelier. Which brings me to his company, Vine Society, a wine experience company on a mission to pair food and meaningful human connection. Like myself, Adam puts a high priority on family dinners and the relationships that are formed there. To create Vine Society, he took that same idea of connecting people around the table. How does he do it? By making zero excuses and creating purposeful time together with family, friends, and colleagues. I'm Nick Smurley, and here's my conversation with Adam. Let's talk a little bit about the golf story. You had a vision of becoming a professional golfer, and that didn't pan out. Tell me a little bit about kind of how that happened, and how did that set you up for where you are today?
There's a lot of layers to the story, but I competed at a top national level as an amateur, and I think that there's a leap that you need to make. That even one of I wouldn't necessarily call him a good friend, but his name's Patrick Rogers. He's from Indianapolis, and he was the number one ranked amateur in the world before he broke all of Tiger Woods' records at Stanford University. And yet, even he is not. You don't know his name, right? He's been on the PGA Tour for a number of years, and so I look at that and I realize here's someone who's at the absolute top of the level, and it still can't quite make the leap to being an elite professional. I don't want to denigrate his accomplishments. He's done a great thing, but so that's my story in many ways of just reached. I think I had the lowest scoring average in the state of Indiana my senior year of high school. Went to Purdue University, and really just didn't improve to a dynamic level to be able to go on. And I also saw a little bit of the reality of the lifestyle. Think about the PGA Tour. There's 125 members. Those are the top 125 players in the entire world. Think about just how elite of a group that is. And there's plenty of mini tours leading up to that, but the lifestyle is not glamorous. So I had a number of my teammates that went on to become professionals, and I'm kind of seeing this isn't what you thought it was, watching the Masters and the US Open, and you know what I mean? So I think there's a bit of a reality check there as well. And I don't think I would be married to my wife today if I had tried to play professional golf. I really don't. I mean, there's, a trajectory that your life would take if you pack up your life in a suitcase and drive around the country playing the mini tours, that I don't know if she would have followed me on that journey before we were married. So anyway, so I think, you look back and you're like, on the one hand, yeah, it's a dream that wasn't realized, but it was a wonderful journey, really was. And met amazing people, played golf all over the country. So, but yeah, I think that there's a recognition that I really did not make the leap I needed to be able to play at that level.
For me, when you look at kind of the dream that didn't become realized, I kind of feel like at the end of the day, though, like you look at people that dream big, it kind of expands your balloon a bit. It kind of expands your world to say that you dared to go that big. And yeah, you didn't get to where perhaps you thought you could be, but at the end of the day, it kind of forces you to create kind of habits around discipline and thinking bigger and challenging yourself and all these kind of other characteristics that perhaps yield why you're on shows like this now, where I think you're interesting and successful. So thanks for sharing that part of it. Let's transition a bit. We can touch a little bit on the consulting side of things, but my passion being around good food, good wine, good community. Talk a little bit about the shift from a consulting company to getting Vine Society off the ground, and how did that happen? And talk just a little bit about kind of that transition in your mind.
It's a good one. I mean, I think that the story kind of begins when I had taken a trip to Italy and had this amazing experience, brought all this great wine back. And then for my birthday, I wanted to celebrate I had one of my good friends who is a fantastic chef, had him over. I kind of just paired up all this great Italian wine that we had just brought home and just had a meal, almost like kind of reliving the experience. And I noticed years went by and people still talked about that. Just this, it's just a dinner, it's just, but that had so much legs just in relationships of the people that were there experiencing that. It was almost like it was a bonding experience. And then, I had seen we've all been to a number of these fundraisers, right? These charity galas, and not to denigrate the work at all, but like it's rubber chicken and it's super boring, and and yet it could be, I think, so much more than that. And I think that Vine Society was almost like a little bit of this scratching my own itch of like, I think this could be done a different way, which I think applied to corporate entertainment. I think it applied to all kinds of different things where we're gathering together. I think recognizing the opportunity that could be for relational development, and then just seeing how these, particularly European cultures, my brother-in-law for 30 years, every day would stop working once he was of age, and he would go to his parents' home and he would have dinner with his extended family. So for them, it's siesta. It's a 2:00 meal. And then you'd go back to work and you'd finish your day. But like that to me was almost like that was a mind-blowing thing to see that. Like to imagine, how could that even happen in America? I mean, I don't know that it could. And so I think just to seeing just how a meal was used so dynamically for just knitting together, human relationships, just inspired me. And so I thought, I'll go try this thing out. And it kind of snowballed into became a real thing. It was a hobby that later became a thing, which I think is kind of a cool entrepreneurial story as well.
There's no question that like isn't that the ultimate though, is to find something you're actually passionate about and then turn it into something that pays you to do it. I mean, you can't get much better than that.
I am blessed for sure.
How did you settle on the business model of Vine Society and what you offer, specifically the Indianapolis community, but what do you offer, kind of the communities that you're serving?
There was one moment in particular. I was at the French Laundry in Napa Valley. For those that don't know, it's super fancy. It's one of those like, for me, it was like a bucket list experience, and just how excited we were like little kids running around, FAO shorts or whatever. It was like, we were just so excited about it. And I thought, okay, this experience was so good. Like, well, I'm not gonna be able to recreate that. Like, how can I take it as a template? And so Vine Society the idea was born of like having a long, slow dinner with multiple courses, which I think, interestingly, it keeps us engaged. When we go and we sit down, we have a large meal. The next thing is a nap, right? But when you have a long, coursed out dinner with multiple like physical experiences, it draws you in. It draws you into what's happening around the table. And so that was kind of like the genesis of, again, if I'm going to use something like a dinner to create relationship, then that becomes like the framing idea or the framing question for everything that you do after that. So it had to be a long, slow dinner that was engaging. And so the French Laundry kind of seemed like a just basic idea. So private chef, private sommelier, pairing experience. And now then the dinner becomes the experience in and of itself, right? So there's an educational aspect to it. So it's not just a meal anymore. There's something more.
Talk a little bit about kind of how Vine Society, which we'll spend a lot more time talking about, but that the spirit of that European siesta, or that spirit of the long dinner. Again, I'm Italian, and so every time we go back to Italy, the 9 p.m. dinner that lasts till midnight is kind of a big cultural staple for me and my family as well. Have you taken lessons that don't involve Vine Society back to your family? Have you fundamentally changed the way that you guys celebrate your family community?
That's a great question. And the short answer is yes. And I'm a bit of a tinkerer. I'm like always thinking about this and how can I, particularly as my girls get a little bit older, and it's not just purely like slap food on the plate as quickly as possible and get it down to their throat so they can move on and play. Like we do spend time together around the table. And I think that there's a study out of Columbia University, which I think articulates a really interesting point, which is they looked at childhood development. And so they try to track it on a number of different planes. And like one of the shocking things is that there was one metric that seemed to be kind of like the first domino that took care of all the rest. And that was, do you have dinner with your family 5 nights a week or more? If you had that one thing, every other piece. Now that doesn't really make sense, right? Like, why would you be a good reader, right? Or why would you abstain from drugs if you have, like, that doesn't necessarily correlate. But I think that what I've come to realize is that there's a way you have to order your life in order for that to even be possible. And I think that might actually be the thing. And so if I think about our family dinner, like I'm constantly trying to get our girls engaged. Like there's these little table topics thing that Chick-fil-A gives out. Something as simple as just, what's your favorite game to play? And like my girls love games. So it's like it's always changing. Like, I think there's a way to engage even young kids through the dinner table. So yes, I take it very seriously just in terms of I want to capitalize on the time. That's really the point. So yeah, I'm always tinkering with it and I really enjoy it actually.
And that's a good way to look at it. And we talk a lot on the show about this idea of setting up systems, which is, again, I feel like everyone's got the goal of being a world-class parent, but what are the systems that you're doing to realize that goal? And one of those in our world too is the family dinner. It's a non-negotiable. I don't take work meetings at 5:30 anymore. If somebody has to meet out for a drink, I'm meeting them at 4 so I can be home by 5:30. We really try to kind of re-articulate our life to have that family dinner, because breakfast is sheer chaos, getting things out the door. And I will punctuate your point too around the cards. As cheesy as it sounds and uncomfortable it is to pull it out, because I kind of get the eye roll from my wife every once in a while as I pull them out. They open up conversation, and it's not your traditional, how was your day? What was your favorite part? What did you do for lunch? Like the classic questions that aren't going to make that dinner time special. It's just going to be kind of filling the time. So I love that you guys are doing that. Talk a little bit about, again, you created Vine Society for this idea of kind of creating community. And I feel like, again, I'm a tech CEO. So I feel like we're in this weird state of technology is bringing us closer and closer together in theory, but the reality is, I think you probably know the study better than I do in terms of number of people that can say that they have a best friend. I mean, it's in the 40%. I mean, it's some absurdly low number. So somehow, some way, we've created more ways to connect and yet are connecting less. Talk about kind of how you see that and how you've seen that play out in your community.
We could probably loop that back into the founding story in many ways, because one of the few times I can remember like being like, when you read an article based on the title, you kind of have an idea where it's going. Like you're not often like shocked, right? But I had an experience reading Harvard Business Review. This has been 4 or 5 years ago now. And the former Surgeon General, who's now again the Surgeon General, his name's Vivek Murthy, he wrote an article in the Harvard Business Review that said that, that in his time as a doctor, something like 30 or 40 years, the number one pathology affecting America was not heart disease, was not diabetes, not cancer, not anything that you would normally look at. He says it was loneliness. When I read this, I'm like, this doesn't make zero sense to me. Like, how is that worse than cancer or whatever you think? But again, this is 4 or 5 years ago. So I kind of start going down this rabbit hole. And so I actually turned 37 next week. And so I'm going through this. I'm in kind of like my early mid 30s. And one of the stats that jumped out at me was a 25-year-old male, and this applies to females as well, just not as drastically. A 25-year-old male over the next 10 years of his life will lose 90% of his relationships of his life up until that point. So I was kind of in the middle of that, but I didn't see it, right? So I'm like, wait a second. Actually, yeah, like my high school buddies, my college buddies, like, because on average we're moving multiple times. We're on our 4th job, right? So there's all of this churn, this turnover in your life, and then you have, not everyone, but many are getting married, having a family, which is a good thing. But you're actually isolated within the nuclear family in the context of your friendships, and so. To bring it full circle, I was like, it was just kind of like this eye-opening thing of like, oh my goodness, like realizing what was happening. There's some funny articles out there too. Billy Baker, he had an article in the Boston Globe that at the time was the single most viral article in the paper's history. And it was about this idea of middle-aged men having no friends. And he did a phenomenal job with his humor and whatnot. But I think it's high time we just recognize this. And if I'm thinking about what's one of my number one favorite things to do with people that I love, it's to have dinner. So, I mean, it doesn't get any more complicated than that. But then how then do you actually carve out the time to do that? So I think that, Vivek Murthy's call in the Harvard Business Review was to company leaders to recognize that, since the cultural institutions that we have grown up with in the last 50, 100 years are going away predominantly, a lot of civic institutions, there's a famous book called Bowling Alone, where there's more bowling than ever, but there's the fewest number of bowling leagues. All, the Lions Club, Rotary Club, all of these civic institutions, church participation is down. So we're doing all of these things individually that we used to do as a group. And so, but within the corporation is really kind of like, that's like the last vestige of where people are gathering regularly together. And so anyway, that's maybe a topic beyond the scope of this, but I felt like that Vine Society could be just a context, for this relational development to really happen.
And I think, as you look at loneliness, I feel like we view loneliness as, the isolated person that, isn't surrounding himself with people. And I look at kind of even my journey. I'm with people and interacting with people, 16 of the 24 hours of my day. In no way, if you were looking at my life, you would think that guy is lonely. And I went through really decent stretches of feeling that way, because it wasn't just because you spend time in a room with people. And I put this even with my family, even with my wife sometimes. If you look at it with COVID, if we're spending more time in the same house than we ever did before, but yet we're the furthest away because we weren't purposeful in how we created these interactions. And it almost manifests itself in loneliness, but it doesn't feel like loneliness because I'm with people all day. So of course I shouldn't feel this way. And that's why I appreciate about the business model that you guys put together, is because it's purposeful and present time together versus I'm occupying the same geography as theoretically important people in my life. Does that resonate with you at all, or am I?
Absolutely. I think you hit it on the head in terms of just the intentionality that you referenced there. And if we stick with like a food metaphor, I think we all know from the million food documentaries out there, like there's a way to eat and to consume food that is not actually nutritious to your body. And I think in the same way, we can go through life in such a way that we're living our life, but it's not actually being nutritious to our soul. A meal means everything and it means nothing. In and of itself, what does sitting down and putting food into your body really mean? So you could have a McDonald's drive-through experience where you actually sit down together and, connect with one another, or you could fly by, or you could sit down and have an 8-course meal and never talk about anything substantial at all. Right. And so I think that intentionality, that purposefulness that you point out, it really is everything to get to the root of it.
So obviously let's maybe go into the wine part of things. And one of the things that I appreciate about Vine Society is it's kind of democratized good wine for me. Talked a lot about kind of how Vine Society sources wine, why you have the world's greatest job, because you get to spend your time traveling. Talk a little bit about what your life looks like as a sommelier yourself, and then obviously a purveyor and just a purchaser of wine for the masses.
If we connect the thread here to the dinner, like I would say I was a very, very fast eater for probably most of my life. And for me, wine was like the only thing or the first thing that actually got me to slow down. Like I just was so into this experience of wine and food, and it just arrested my attention. And so I slowed down. And so I think that's kind of the thread to what we talked about before, but then so specifically, like, I think that in America, we have a tendency to industrialize everything, right? If we do something one time, we have to be able to do it a million times and the same way, right? And so I think that when you apply that to wine, you kind of lose sight of what it is. And so this is a little thing that people don't necessarily like to hear, but if you walk through the grocery store, 80% of every wine bottle that you see, and this is particularly in America, it actually comes from 5 different companies that control the vast majority of all wine production in America. It appears that there's a diversity, but there's actually in many cases the exact same wine, exact same juice being bottled at 3 different price points with 3 different labels. Nothing illegal about it. They're essentially tapping into the fact that since we know nothing about wine, we say, oh, a $15 wine must be better than a $7. I'll grab that one, when it's in fact the same exact product. Now, I don't want to overplay that, but that's a factor in all of this. And so I think that you ask about our sourcing of wine, like our wine comes from a family-run vineyard that's predominantly multi-generational. There is some type of environmental stewardship going on. Oftentimes they're organic or biodynamic. There's other certifications out there, but there is some idea of passing down to the next generation without stripping the earth, if you will, of its nutrients. that comes into play. So the unfortunate reality is that most of our wine is not from America. Now, there's plenty of American vintners that follow what I just said, but oftentimes their price tag is up here. So that's just the bare bones reality. We love Spanish wine, we love French wine, we love Italian wine. I mean, there's hardly any country that we don't source from, but I find that quality to value ratio really comes together in a lot of very old European wineries.
Let's do a quick bit of a right turn. COVID has definitely kind of opened up some opportunities or some risks when it comes to building community or building, purposeful time together. It's been easier on the family. It's been more difficult for creating space. One of the things that you cited was kind of the obligations of business leaders to understand the loneliness epidemic and, certainly the mental health stuff that comes along with that. Talk a little bit about kind of where you see business leaders or business people or just generally people that influence the world of, we're still technically in the midst of a pandemic. We're heading into the wintertime. Who knows what's going to happen? How do you still build community? How do you still build space together? And how do you, again, be it Vine Society, be it not Vine Society, how do we manage through this until it becomes easier to get people in the same room at the same time?
Man, that's such a hard question, because I think that, we all have Zoom fatigue, but I think that there's a couple silver linings to that. One is I've connected with people, particularly from my past, that are across the country, right? That it was all of a sudden, it was like, why didn't we think about this beforehand? It's like some college, but it's like, so that to me is a great thing. So as our workforces become more remote, I think that's been a good thing. But before April 2020, I had not done a single virtual wine tasting. Thought never crossed my mind. And then all of a sudden, we've done hundreds and hundreds now, Nick, hundreds and hundreds. And I think that what's been interesting in terms of what the Vine Society's role has been is that even though we're not together, like we're having the same physical experience together. And there's something really, I can't put my finger on it, but there's something very interesting about just the simplicity. And you've been on a number of these with the one we have. It somehow bridges the gap a little bit. And of course, not all the way there, but I think that as hard as it is, I think we have to still make some space for some of these times, right? There's not a business agenda. There's not. This isn't a meeting. This is just a chance. And so maybe if we pair that with some of these intentional questions that we talked about, I find that actually dialogue in the virtual format is actually enhanced, because when you get 12 people in a room together, there's 6 side conversations happening, right? So I think that maybe even after we get people back in the same room, a hybrid might make sense, but at a minimum, like let's not neglect gathering together, even if it has to be virtually, but let's add that intentionality component that can perhaps take it to the next level.
And one of the things that you mentioned slightly, but I'll kind of pull it out a little bit more, was the shared experience. What was nice about the virtual wine tastings, and whether it's wine or whether it's something else, is you were holding the same bottle that I was holding, and yet we're in 2 different spots. And I thought that was this kind of key link. And so for me, sharing common experiences, there's something to be said about it. And so whether it's church or whether it's hobbies or whether it's wine or whether it's food or whether it's good dialogue or whether it's a passion for the environment, who cares? You're creating something to be shared. And so to bring it back to your comment, is what made it special for me is you were drinking and talking about the same bottle of wine that I happened to be holding. And we didn't have to be holding the exact same bottle of wine, but yet we were still drinking the same. And so it was almost like we were kind of this truly shared experience virtually. And so it allowed it for that. So making sure any of those digital experiences have that, I thought was what made that special and unique versus, I would say, a traditional meeting.
Yeah, I think it's good.
So as you look ahead, what's the future of Vine Society? Are you optimistic that the idea of community and spirit through food and drink is alive and well and will continue to be pervasive over the course of the next few years?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we've, for those of us that have ventured out, I mean, restaurants, that was one of the first things people wanted to do, right? When they could. And so I think that clearly that demand is there. The short answer is it's definitely alive and well. And yeah, I think it's going to come roaring back. The restaurant industry has been hit really hard. So let's all give them a little bit of grace and their time of kind of transitioning and finding the right people to help and whatnot. I'm just curiously watching it, as conferences come back online and different things at these larger gatherings, that we may see a very long-term impact from large gatherings. I don't think anybody really knows at this point. But certainly at the small level, whether that's with your family, whether that's with a group of neighbors, whatever. I mean, I would like to see that come roaring back very, very strong.
So as we kind of head into the last question of the day, it's a little bit more of a broad question for you, which is more, if you had to leave people with kind of one message of, I listened to Adam's podcast on Zero Excuses and I took away this one thing, I guess what would be the thing either we've talked about or I've somehow failed to ask you along the way that you think would be relevant to conclude our time together today?
What we're getting at when we talk about purpose and intentionality is, I think that what we're dancing around is, what's the most important thing? You almost have to start there and you kind of work your way down. And I think that as I get older, I think that the field of play kind of narrows a little bit, right? We even talked about like the dream of professional golf going away. Like when I was 15, like if you had asked me, I would have told you I probably could have been an astronaut professional golfer, right? Like there's no limit to what we can do, right? But I think that it wanes with time. So I think for anyone out there today, I think that this is an opportunity, maybe perhaps for the first time in a long time. Maybe COVID was very disorienting for you. For me personally, it gave me so much time to reflect on these most important things to me. And I feel like I came out of it with like a lot of renewed clarity. But not everyone's had that same opportunity. So perhaps this is a chance to really reflect on what are the most important things in your life, and then order your life around that. Put real fences in for the use of your time, and take it. If you're going to eat, it might as well be delicious, and it might as well be with people that you love. But take advantage of that time together.
So a good message to finish it off today. Adam, man, thanks for making the time. I love hearing the story. How do people get in contact with you or Vine Society or anything like that?
So website is www.vinesocietyindy.com. So it's VINE Society INDY, and that's our Instagram handle as well. We've got a wine club. I pick out 3 bottles a month and send it out. That would be probably the easiest way to just jump in. But if you want to host one of these dinners, you can shoot me an email directly. It's adam@vinesocietyindy.com. If you're feeling inspired by this, just take a risk, be a little bit vulnerable, host, open up your home or whatever. Pick the venue of your choice. But yeah, let's get people together.
Have you joined our Zero Excuses community at LinkedIn? You'll get connected to other business leaders achieving amazing things while staying grounded to their values. Simply search Zero Excuses on LinkedIn and you'll find us.